I never thought I'd be the guy sitting in a divorce court listening to my wife tell a judge I was worthless. But there I was, watching her perform for the room like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. The guy next to her, her lawyer/boyfriend, kept nodding along like she was reciting scripture. Then the judge said one sentence that made her face go white. That's when everything changed. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter, but for the sake of this story, call me whatever you want. I'm 54, been married for over 2 decades, and I work in tech consulting. The kind of work where you're invisible until something breaks, then suddenly everyone needs you. My wife, let's call her Vanessa, never really understood what I did. She knew I traveled, knew I worked late, but the details? She never asked. To her, I was just gone a lot, and when I was home, I was tired. That's all she saw. Or maybe that's all she wanted to see. Our marriage wasn't always cold. There was a time when we'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing, when we'd drive around aimlessly just to spend time together. But somewhere between the mortgage payments and the school pickups and the endless work deadlines, we stopped being partners and started being roommates. Then we stopped being roommates and started being strangers who shared an address. The courtroom that day smelled like furniture polish and stale air. We were in one of those old county buildings with high ceilings and wooden benches that creak when you breathe wrong. The kind of place that's seen 1,000 broken families pass through its doors, each one thinking their story is unique until they realize everyone's pain looks pretty much the same under fluorescent lights. Vanessa stood next to her attorney, a slick guy named Trevor Ashford who looked like he bought his personality at the same store as his expensive suits. He had that voice, you know the type, where every word sounds like it should be engraved on a monument. The kind of guy who probably practiced his courtroom speeches in the mirror and thought he was the hero of every case he touched. Vanessa started her speech. Your Honor, I've shouldered this marriage alone for years. Dominic contributes nothing. He doesn't support our family. He's just there, taking up space. He's a burden, a leech. Trevor nodded like a bobblehead, like every word out of her mouth was pure gold. I stood there at my table, hands folded, staring at a scratch on the judge's bench. I've always been the type to stay quiet, let people dig their own graves with their words. But hearing her call me a leech stung more than I expected. We'd been drifting apart for years, sure, but she'd never said anything like that to my face. Never with that much venom. Never with that much conviction. It was like she'd been rehearsing this character assassination for months, perfecting every word, every pause, every tremor in her voice, designed to make her look like the victim and me look like the villain. Trevor stepped forward with his rehearsed confidence. Your Honor, my client has endured years of emotional neglect and financial irresponsibility. She's asking for full custody of their daughter, the family home, and 60% of marital assets. 60%. Like I was some deadbeat who'd been sleeping on the couch for 20 years. Like I hadn't been the one paying the mortgage, the car payments, the insurance, the college fund contributions. Like I hadn't been the one making sure the lights stayed on and the fridge stayed full. But according to their version of reality, I was just dead weight, a parasite. Someone who'd been coasting on her hard work while I did nothing. My lawyer, an older guy named Walter Finch, who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Nixon administration, nudged me gently. Stay calm, he whispered. Let it unfold. I wasn't angry yet, just exhausted. The kind of tired that settles into your bones when you're past 50 and realize you've been running on empty for years. The kind of tired that comes from decades of trying to do the right thing only to have someone stand in front of a judge and tell the world you never did anything at all. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, to tell my side of the story. But Walter had been clear. Let them talk. Let them build their case. Let them think they're winning. Then we'll show them what the truth looks like. Judge Brennan, a gray-haired man in his 60s with a thick mustache, flipped through the paperwork. He adjusted his reading glasses, squinting at the documents like something didn't add up. I could see the moment it clicked for him. The moment he realized the numbers in front of him didn't match the story being told. Finally, he cleared his throat. Mrs. Caldwell, he said slowly, are you and Mr. Ashford aware that, Mr. Caldwell reported a gross income of approximately $470,000 last fiscal year? The room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. You could hear someone in the back row shift in their seat. You could hear Vanessa's sharp intake of breath. The silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Vanessa blinked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. I'm sorry, what? $470,000, the judge repeated louder this time, and similar figures in previous years. Trevor's face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Vanessa grabbed the edge of the table like her knees were about to give out. I watched her process the number, watched her brain try to reconcile what she'd just heard with the story she'd been telling herself. The story she'd been telling everyone else, the story where I was the freeloader and she was the martyr. The judge looked genuinely confused. So, an annual income of nearly $500,000 qualifies as being a leech now? A few people in the gallery laughed quietly. Someone muttered, "Sign me up for that kind of leeching." Another voice whispered, "Wish my husband was that useless." The courtroom had shifted. Suddenly, Vanessa wasn't the sympathetic victim anymore. She was the woman who didn't know her own husband made $500,000 a year. She was the woman who'd just called a high earner a freeloader in front of a judge. Vanessa shook her head, her voice cracking. "I didn't know. He never told me." I finally looked at her. All those years of late nights coding until dawn, sleeping in airport terminals during project launches, all those hours I thought I was building something for us. She never asked, never cared enough to know. And now she was standing in front of a judge, claiming ignorance like it was a defense. Like not knowing somehow made her the victim. Like my silence about my income was the problem, and not her complete lack of interest in our financial reality. Judge Brennan set the papers down. "We'll need additional testimony and clarification. This case is far from resolved. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Court adjourned." The gavel cracked like a thunderclap. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, staring at me like I was a stranger. Trevor whispered something harsh to her, but she didn't respond. I walked out of that courtroom with my shoulders tight and my breath uneven. Outside, the street was busy with midday traffic. A bus rumbled past, brakes squealing. The smell of coffee drifted from a nearby shop, but all I could hear was her voice echoing in my head. "He's a burden, a leech." Funny thing is, I'd worked myself to the edge, thinking the long hours were worth it, that providing quietly was the same as showing love. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I should have been louder about it. Maybe I should have come home and announced my bonuses, waved my pay stubs around, made sure she knew exactly how much I was bringing in. But that felt wrong, felt like bragging, felt like turning our marriage into a transaction. I thought love meant you didn't keep score. Turns out when you don't keep score, someone else will, and they'll make up whatever numbers suit their narrative. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I passed a truck with a faded bumper sticker from a local veterans group. It triggered a memory, an old summer barbecue, our daughter Lily running around with a water balloon, Vanessa laughing beside me with a paper plate in her hand. That memory hurt worse than anything she'd said in court, because that version of us felt like it had died years ago. Today was just the funeral. I remembered how she used to look at me back then, like I was someone worth looking at, like I mattered. When did that change? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when she decided I wasn't enough anymore? Maybe it was when I missed Lily's school play because of a client emergency. Maybe it was when I fell asleep during a movie she'd been excited to watch. Maybe it was 1,000 tiny moments that added up to her deciding I was disposable. I stood on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, staring back at the courthouse doors. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. But I could feel something building inside me, a slow burn, a need not for revenge but for truth. If they wanted to drag my name through lies, then I owed it to myself, to let the truth speak louder than they ever expected. And as I walked toward the parking garage, one thought settled in my mind, heavy but clear. They thought the judge reading my income was the big reveal. They had no idea what was coming next. When I drove home that afternoon, the sky was that dull gray that makes everything look washed out and tired. I took the long route, past strip malls and old brick houses, past the grocery store where we used to shop on Sunday mornings when Lily was small. I didn't want to go home right away. The house suddenly felt like a place that used to mean something but didn't anymore. I drove past the elementary school where Lily learned to read, past the park where we used to have family picnics before life got too busy for things like that. Every landmark was a ghost of something that used to be real. Every street corner held a memory of a family that no longer existed. It was like driving through a museum of my own life, looking at exhibits of happiness that had been preserved behind glass, untouchable, unreachable, gone. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the wind had picked up, rustling through the last orange leaves clinging to our oak tree. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, replaying everything Vanessa had said. A leech, a burden, just existing. Strange how 22 years can shrink into one ugly sentence. Inside, everything felt too quiet. The thermostat hummed. Old coffee smell lingered in the air. I walked through the living room, stopping by the hallway where we kept family photos. Christmas at the community center, Lily's middle school graduation, a 4th of July cookout. Looking at them, it hit me how far we drifted. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, inch by inch, the way a foundation cracks over time until the damage finally shows. In every photo, we were smiling. In every photo, we looked like a normal, happy family. But photos lie. They capture a single second, freeze it in time, make you think that second represents the whole truth. They don't show what happened 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after. They don't show the arguments in the car on the way home, the silent dinners, the sleeping in separate rooms. They just show the smile, and the smile is always a lie when the marriage is dying. People think marriages fall apart because of something big, one explosive fight or a single betrayal. But ours didn't. It crumbled in silence. I met Vanessa in our early 20s at a community college. We were both broke, ambitious, and young enough to think love could fix anything. We moved to the city after I landed my first IT job. Those early years were simple. Cheap furniture, late-night pizza, road trips to the lake. We struggled, but we struggled together. I remember sitting on the floor of our first apartment with nothing but lawn chairs and a mattress, eating fast food and laughing at nothing. Those were the days that made sense. Back then, we'd talk for hours about our dreams, about the life we were going to build. She wanted to go back to school, maybe become a teacher. I wanted to work my way up in tech, maybe start my own company someday. We had plans, we had hope, we had each other, and that felt like enough. When did it stop being enough? When did the dreams turn into obligations and the hope turn into resentment? Somewhere along the line, work consumed my life. I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing. The moment things started slipping was probably when my consulting gigs picked up. I was traveling between cities constantly. I'd get home at midnight, the house dark, Vanessa asleep with her back turned. We barely talked on weekdays. She'd say I wasn't present. I'd say I was doing this for us. Neither of us really listened. The truth is, we were both right and both wrong. She was right that I wasn't present. I was physically there, but mentally I was always somewhere else, always thinking about the next project, the next deadline, the next problem that needed solving. But I was also right that I was doing it for us. Every extra hour I worked was another dollar in the bank, another step toward financial security, another brick in the foundation of the life I thought we were building together. The problem was, while I was building that foundation, the house on top of it was falling apart, and I was too busy to notice. I started volunteering at a local veterans post on weekends when I could, helping with events even though I wasn't a vet myself. My dad was, and I liked the people there. Vanessa came with me for a while. Then she stopped. When she did show up, I could tell she felt disconnected, like she was standing in a room she didn't belong in anymore. People assume the affair was the beginning of the end, but honestly, it was just a symptom. The real ending started long before that. I first noticed something was off the night she came home late from helping her sister with some legal paperwork. She smelled like cologne, expensive stuff Trevor would wear. Her cheeks were flushed. When I asked if everything was okay, she snapped at me, like I'd accused her of homicide. The defensiveness was immediate and disproportionate, the kind of reaction that tells you everything you need to know if you're willing to see it, but I wasn't willing, not yet. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because if I didn't believe her, then I had to face the possibility that my marriage was over, and I wasn't ready for that. After that, the excuses multiplied. Working late, meeting a friend, helping Trevor review documents for her aunt, attending a book club that didn't seem to have many books. Then came the phone calls she'd take in the other room, the phone always face down, the lingering smile she'd try to hide when she texted. She started dressing differently, wearing perfume on random Tuesday afternoons, coming home with new clothes she claimed were on sale, but still had the tags hidden in her purse. The signs were all there, bright and obvious, but I kept making excuses for her because making excuses was easier than facing the truth. I didn't want to be the jealous husband. I didn't want to dig. But silence can speak volumes when a marriage is dying. The night everything clicked wasn't dramatic. I didn't walk in on anything, no smoking tool. It happened at a gas station. I was coming home from a project late at night, almost 11, and I stopped for gas. That's when I saw Trevor's car, his unmistakable silver sedan, pulling out of an alley behind a small rental property. Vanessa was in the passenger seat, hair messy, wearing a jacket I'd never seen before. They were laughing about something, her hand on his arm, his hand on the steering wheel, both of them looking like people who didn't have a care in the world. Both of them looking like people who weren't destroying a family. They didn't see me. I stood there at the pump, watching them drive away, the gas nozzle still in my hand, the numbers on the meter climbing higher and higher. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the pump to click off. Long enough for the cold to seep through my jacket. Long enough for the reality to sink in that my wife was cheating on me with her lawyer, and they were probably planning to take me for everything I had. I didn't go home and confront her. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I sat in my car in that gas station parking lot, staring at the glowing sign advertising cheap hot dogs. My hands were shaking, not with anger, but with something deeper. A mixture of heartbreak and exhaustion. The kind where you tell yourself this can't be happening, even though your gut knows it is. When I got home, she was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at her. I could have ended everything that night, but I was too numb. So I did what I always do. I worked, and I watched, and I listened. A few days later, I logged into our shared laptop to find some documents. That's when an email notification popped up, an auto-forward she'd forgotten to disable. It was from Trevor. Once we make him look financially unstable on paper, the judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor. My hands went still. A coldness ran through me. Not rage, not yet, but something sharper. Something that told me the fight ahead wasn't just about infidelity. They were tampering with my life, my work, my finances. Trying to rewrite the story of a man who'd spent decades keeping this family afloat. They weren't just ending the marriage. They were trying to destroy me in the process. Trying to take everything I'd worked for and paint me as the villain while they rode off into the sunset together. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated, premeditated destruction. I printed the email, then another, and another, proof of the affair, proof of the manipulation, proof of the lies. I stood there in the soft glow of the desk lamp, pages in my hand, feeling the last thread of the marriage snap. But revenge didn't come to me right away. Honestly, the first thing I felt was grief. Grief for the woman I married. Grief for what we used to be. Grief for the 22 years I thought meant something to her. I grieved for the future we'd never have, for the grandchildren we'd never watch grow up together, for the retirement we'd never share. I grieved for every moment I'd wasted trying to save something that was already dead. That grief sat on my chest like a stone. Then, slowly, another feeling crept in. Not anger, not hatred, purpose. Because if she and Trevor wanted a war built on lies, then I'd show them what happens when the truth is louder. I wasn't going to fight dirty. I wasn't going to stoop to their level. I was just going to present the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful tool you have, and they'd given me plenty of truth to work with. That night, as I turned off the lamp and walked upstairs, I made my decision. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to fall apart, I was going to fight. Fairly, quietly, precisely, and with the truth as my only tool. When the sun came up the next morning, the house felt different. Not emptier, just quieter, in a way that made me notice sounds I'd ignored for years. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of the furnace, the creak of the floorboards. Funny how silence gets louder when you know a truth you can't unknow. I made coffee the same way I always did. Black drip machine, off-brand grounds. But it tasted different. Bitter. Metallic. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was everything. I sat at the kitchen table with the printed emails spread out in front of me. Some showed affection between Vanessa and Trevor. Others showed strategy. How to portray me as absent, unstable, broke. But the worst ones weren't about the affair. They were about the taxes. I'm not an accountant, but I know numbers. I could see immediately that one of our joint returns had been altered, a deduction missing here, income shifted there, and the signature wasn't mine. Someone had forged it, and that someone was either Trevor or Vanessa, or both of them working together. Trevor must have filed something on our behalf, with Vanessa's blessing. They hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. They'd crossed into federal territory, tax fraud, forgery, conspiracy. These weren't just marital problems anymore. These were crimes. And they'd committed them thinking I was too stupid or too passive to notice. They'd underestimated me, and that was going to be their downfall. I felt my pulse in my throat as I stared at the papers. A younger version of me would have stormed into the bedroom, thrown the documents on the bed, demanded answers. But the man I was at 54 just felt tired, and that tiredness kept me calm enough to think clearly. If they wanted to make me look like a leech, they'd have to destroy my financial credibility. And if they'd falsified tax information to do it, that was something I could use. But as soon as that thought formed, guilt followed. Was I really about to blow up the life of the woman I'd once loved, the mother of my daughter? Was revenge worth that? Then I thought about Lily, her soft voice telling me just last month, "Dad, you're barely home anymore. Mom says you don't care." Vanessa had been poisoning the well for a long time. Suddenly, the guilt didn't feel so heavy. Still, before doing anything, I needed clarity. Someone to tell me whether what I suspected was real or just a product of heartbreak. So I grabbed the stack of documents and drove to a small accounting office nearby. My buddy Raymond worked there. We weren't close, but he was honest and steady, the kind of guy who fixes your numbers without judging your chaos. I walked into his office unannounced. He raised his eyebrows when he saw the bundle in my hand. "This looks like trouble," he said. "You have no idea," I replied. I sat across from him while he combed through the papers. He didn't rush. Raymond never rushed. He tapped his pen a few times, squinted, muttered under his breath. Finally, he set everything down. "Dominic," he said, looking me dead in the eye, "this isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is intentional." My throat went dry. Intentional how? They shifted income, omitted forms, adjusted deductions, and unless you signed a version I'm not seeing, someone forged your name. I felt heat rise up my neck. Not anger, just the realization that everything I'd been holding together was now officially shattered. Raymond continued, "You need a lawyer. Not a mild one. A real one." I nodded, slid the papers back into the folder, and walked out into the cold parking lot. The wind stung my face, but it helped. It made me feel awake again. Alive. As I sat in my truck, I remembered something a retired Marine at the Veterans Post told me the month before. His name was Frank, and he'd said, "When someone takes a swing at your honor, kid, don't swing back. Just step aside and let the punch break their own hand." Back then, I'd laughed it off, but now it felt like prophecy. I decided to visit Frank. He lived in a small ranch house near a local park. The man was pushing 70, but still sharp as a tack. He opened the door and said, "You look like heck, Dominic. Get in here." I handed him the folder. He put on his reading glasses and sat at his kitchen table with a steaming mug of black tea. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, just read everything. When he finished, he pushed the papers back toward me. "So," he said, "they want to bury you. Looks that way. And you want revenge." "I want fairness," I said quietly. "I want the truth to mean something." Frank nodded approvingly. "Good. Then don't raise your voice. Don't get dramatic. Just build a case so tight they suffocate in it." Those words hit me like a steel rod down the spine. A case. Not a fight, not a screaming match. A case. It made sense. I wasn't a cruel man. I didn't want it to hurt Vanessa just to hurt her. But if she and Trevor wanted to twist lies into tools, I'd counter with facts. I spent the next few days doing exactly what Frank said. Organizing. Documenting. Quietly preparing. Late at night, while Vanessa slept in the guest room, I printed bank statements, emails, tax filings, receipts, photos, anything relevant. I bought a thick binder and divided it into tabs. Emails, tax records, travel logs, phone history, work contracts, witness notes. Each tab was meticulously organized, each document carefully labeled and dated. I cross-referenced everything, made sure every claim I was going to make had at least 2 pieces of supporting evidence. I wasn't just building a case, I was building an airtight, bulletproof, undeniable case that would leave no room for doubt, no room for interpretation, no room for their lies to breathe. I wasn't just preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to dismantle the story they were building. Every email they'd sent, every lie they'd told, every document they'd forged, it was all going in the binder. And when the time came, I was going to hand that binder to the judge and watch their entire strategy collapse under the weight of the truth. But with every piece of evidence I gathered, The weight on my chest grew heavier because each sheet of paper wasn't just proof of wrongdoing. It was another nail in the coffin of the marriage I once believed in. One night, as I was sorting documents, I heard a soft knock on my door. It was Lily. "Dad?" she whispered, stepping inside. "Why are you still up?" I shut the binder quickly. "Just work stuff." She fidgeted, eyes on the floor. "Mom says you're trying to punish her. She says you're different now." My heart cracked. "Lily, I'm just trying to protect myself." "From Mom?" I hesitated. "From lies," I wanted to say. But she didn't fully understand, so she just nodded anyway, like a kid trying to make sense of adult problems too big for her world. After she left, I sat back in my chair staring at the binder. This wasn't going to be easy. Whatever revenge meant in my mind, it had consequences. But letting them rewrite who I was, letting them take my daughter from me, letting them destroy my reputation, that wasn't an option. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. Facts, dates, proof. All that remained was to put it in front of the one person who mattered, the judge. As I snapped the binder shut, a wave of calm washed over me. I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken, I wasn't lost. I was ready. And the truth, once it stepped into that courtroom, was going to be louder than any lie they told. 2 weeks later, when I walked back into the county courthouse, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. Like a man who had finally stopped apologizing for breathing. The hallway smelled like old paper and burnt coffee from the tiny kiosk on the first floor. The elevator dinged with that tired, hollow sound. A small line of people waited outside the courtroom. Older couples clutching divorce papers. A man in work clothes arguing with a woman over property. A teenage boy slumped in a chair playing with a cracked phone. Real life. Unpolished, unglamorous, unmistakably real. When I stepped inside the courtroom, Vanessa was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked worn, hair too carefully styled, makeup covering puffy eyes. Not the confident woman who'd called me a leech 2 weeks ago. Trevor sat beside her, tapping his pen nervously. His suit wasn't as sharp today. His tie wasn't perfectly straight. His confidence seemed to have misplaced itself somewhere between his car and the courthouse door. My attorney, Walter Finch, nodded to me. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." He glanced at the thick binder in my hand. "Once we start, there's no turning back." "I know." The judge entered, his black robe swaying slightly as he settled into the high-backed chair. "Let's proceed," he said. Trevor stood and launched into his opening statement, but his usual smug tone was missing. "Your Honor, we maintain that Mr. Caldwell has been unstable, absent financially." Judge Brennan held up a hand. "Mr. Ashford, before you continue, I want to address the financial documents submitted last session." Trevor swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor. You claim Mr. Caldwell contributed very little to the marital estate, yet the records show substantial income, significantly higher than what was originally presented." Trevor forced a grin. "Well, Your Honor, we may have overlooked." "Overlooked?" The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell's income exceeded $400,000. I do not consider that something one simply overlooks." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Trevor tugged at his tie. Walter stood calmly. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, the respondent would like to enter additional evidence regarding those discrepancies." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I opened the binder. For a moment, the only sound was the soft crack of the rings separating page after page. Emails, tax documents, screenshots lay neatly organized. Walter began. "Your Honor, Exhibit A is a series of emails between Mrs. Caldwell and her attorney, Mr. Ashford, discussing a coordinated effort to portray my client as financially negligent." Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. "Wait, you can't. Those emails were personal. They were sent from your shared laptop," Walter said evenly, "to your attorney during ongoing legal proceedings." The judge's face hardened. Walter continued, turning each tab deliberately. "Exhibit B, edited tax forms. Exhibit C, messages showing Mr. Ashford advising Mrs. Caldwell on how to frame my client in order to sway custody. Exhibit D, GPS timestamps showing Mrs. Caldwell visiting a rental property on nights she claimed she was helping family. Exhibit E, photos of Mrs. Caldwell and Mr. Ashford together, sent accidentally to their shared cloud account. Vanessa's face drained of color. Trevor looked like a man realizing he'd stepped into a trap he'd built himself. Finally, Walter closed the binder. Your Honor, we submit these materials as evidence of both an undisclosed affair and an attempt to commit financial manipulation, including falsifying federal documents. The judge leaned forward slowly, deliberately. Mr. Ashford, he said, you are an officer of this court. Do you deny involvement in preparing or modifying these tax forms? Trevor's lips moved, but no sound came out. Mr. Ashford, the judge repeated, answer the question. I might have assisted, Trevor stammered. But it was what? The judge snapped. Ethical, legal, proper procedure. Trevor wilted in his seat. Vanessa started crying. Not dramatic sobs, but the hollow, broken kind of crying that comes from realizing a lie has run out of runway. The courtroom whispered like a wave moving through the benches. Judge Brennan set his glasses down. I will be referring this matter to the State Bar Association for review, and possibly the IRS. Trevor looked like someone had turned off all the lights inside him. The judge continued, now addressing Vanessa. As for you, Mrs. Caldwell, this evidence significantly damages your credibility. Attempting to misrepresent financial information is not taken lightly in this court. Vanessa's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. Trevor said we had to. Henry, please, she added, looking at me. But I couldn't rescue her. Not from this. Not from choices she made long before we stepped inside this building. The judge turned toward us again. He ruled quickly. All of my premarital assets remain mine. Vanessa would not receive the family home. Custody would be 50-50 with no special privileges. Vanessa would cover her own legal fees. Trevor's conduct would be formally investigated. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Clean, quiet, undeniable. When the judge adjourned, people stood to leave. Some shook their heads, some whispered. A few older men in the back nodded subtly at me, the way men of a certain age communicate respect without words. As I walked toward the exit, Trevor stepped in front of me. His face was pale and slick with sweat. You think you won, Caldwell? He hissed, voice trembling. You think this is over? I studied him for a long moment. Not with hatred, not even anger, just clarity. No, I said softly. I think this is the first honest day you've had in a long time. Vanessa stood behind him, eyes red, hands shaking. For a second, she looked like the woman I married, young, hopeful, full of life. The memory hurt more than anything she'd done. I walked past them both, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. The hallway smelled like dust and winter air from someone opening a window down the hall. And as I stepped outside into the crisp autumn breeze, one truth settled deeper than the rest. The truth hadn't destroyed them. It had simply spoken louder than their lies. In the weeks after the hearing, life didn't snap back into place the way I thought it might. There was no dramatic sunrise, no triumphant music, no moment where I suddenly felt whole again. Instead, life settled slowly, like snow drifting onto an old fence. Quiet, steady, almost unnoticed. Vanessa moved out first. She packed her things into a few cardboard boxes, refusing to make eye contact with me as she loaded them into the back of her car. She never gave a long speech, never apologized. She just said, I'll pick up Lily after school next week, and drove off without turning around. Her new apartment was a small 2-bedroom near a grocery store. It wasn't far, but it felt like a lifetime away from the house where we'd raised our daughter. Trevor vanished from every advertisement in the city within a month. His law firm issued a cold, rehearsed statement about conduct inconsistent with firm values. Word got around the courthouse that an ethics panel had opened a full investigation. Someone told me they'd seen him coming out of the Bar Association building, looking like a man losing pieces of his future with every step. I didn't feel satisfied hearing that. Not happy, not victorious, just settled. That's the thing about getting older. Revenge doesn't taste sweet. It tastes like closure. My own life shifted into something simpler. On weekday mornings, I'd walk into the coffee shop down the street. The cashier, a kid barely old enough to shave, eventually learned my order. Morning, Mr. Caldwell, he'd say, and I realized how strange it was, hearing my own name without tension behind it. I took on fewer travel-heavy contracts, more remote work, more time at home. My evenings weren't spent hunched over a laptop until midnight. Sometimes I just sat on the porch with a jacket on, watching cars roll by under the streetlights. Peaceful moments I didn't realize I'd been starving for. Lily split her time between us. The first few weeks were rocky. She didn't know what to believe, and I didn't pressure her. I picked her up from school every other day, letting her talk about teachers and tests and her friends' drama. She avoided mentioning her mother at first. Then one night, as we were finishing dinner, just simple spaghetti with jarred sauce, she set her fork down and looked at me carefully. "Dad," she said, "Mom told me you were trying to ruin her life." I swallowed. "I'm not trying to ruin anything." She studied my face like she was searching for cracks in the truth. "I know," she finally whispered. "I can see that now." Those 7 words hit me harder than any courtroom victory. She leaned back in her chair. "Mom seems different lately. Tense. She gets mad when I ask questions. You don't need to take sides," I told her softly. "You just need to be honest with yourself and with us." She nodded, then gave a small, sad smile. "I'm glad you're not yelling or breaking stuff. You're just steady." Her voice wavered. I needed that. After she went to bed, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, the overhead light buzzing softly. For the first time since everything started, I felt something warm in my chest, something like healing. The final hearing to settle the paperwork was short, unemotional. Vanessa barely met my eyes. The judge signed off on everything: custody, assets, fees. I walked out with legal dignity intact and, more importantly, with my integrity untouched. Vanessa walked out with something else: consequences. But I didn't celebrate that. Not because I pitied her, but because I finally understood something important. Revenge is rarely about hurting someone. It's about proving to yourself that their lies don't define you. A week later, I stopped by the Veterans Post for the first time since the court case. The Friday fish fry was already underway, grease popping in the fryer, laughter echoing from the back hall, old veterans telling the same stories they'd told 100 times before. Frank sat at a table near the wall, eating a plate of fish with tartar sauce. He looked up when I walked in. "Well, he said, looks like they didn't break you." I pulled out a chair. "Guess not." "You look lighter," Frank said, pointing his fork at me, like a man who finally shook a weight off his shoulders. "More like set it down," I replied. He nodded. "That's the better way." We talked for a while, about Lily, about work, about life after 50. Frank said something that stuck with me. "Truth is a quiet friend, kid. Doesn't show up in a fancy suit, doesn't shout, just stands behind you when it matters." That felt right. That felt like everything I'd lived through. Later that night, as I drove home through the soft glow of streetlights, I rolled the window down and let the cool air fill the truck. It smelled like leaves and chimney smoke, the unmistakable scent of fall rolling into winter. When I pulled into the driveway, I paused before getting out. Lily's bedroom light was on upstairs. The house looked warm, lived in, peaceful. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not at Vanessa, not at Trevor, not even at myself. The only thing left was gratitude for the truth. It had spoken when I couldn't. It had defended me when I felt small. It had stood tall when lies tried to steal my name. And that's what I want people to understand about revenge. Real revenge, not the kind you see in movies. It isn't fire, it isn't shouting, it isn't chaos. It's clarity. It's standing your ground without lowering yourself. It's letting the truth walk into the room first. And if you've ever been underestimated or lied about or pushed into a corner like I was, remember this: you don't need rage to fight back. You don't need to destroy anyone to win. Just let the truth speak loud enough that you don't have to.